Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we distill complicated source material into essential, memorable knowledge.
Glad to be here.
Today we're tackling a really big one, psychology. It's foundational, right, to how we understand ourselves.
Yeah.
Society. Everything.
Absolutely. It's a huge field, often kind of misunderstood, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So our goal today is to unpack its history, look at how it's structured now, and maybe most importantly, talk about the science behind it, the rigor.
It's a major undertaking because psychology, it comes from the Greek psyche for mind or soul and logos for study or knowledge. It really is the study of the mind.
Right.
But crucially, and our sources really hammer this home, this isn't just armchair philosophy, it's systematic.
That's the key difference. We're talking about studying both the things we do, our observable actions, behaviors, and also our internal world. Thoughts, feelings, dreams, how we perceive things. It covers such a vast range.
It really does, from like a single neuron firing up to huge social movements.
Exactly. So for you listening, our mission today is pretty ambitious. We want to quickly synthesize where psychology came from, those early intellectual battles.
Yeah, the founding schools.
Then map out the 6 main perspectives guiding things today. Look at who psychologists are, what they do, the different roles.
And definitely spend good time on the scientific toolkit. How do we actually know things in psychology? The methods.
We'll move fast, but we promise to be thorough. From Wundt's very first lab, right through to modern experimental design.
Let's dive in.
Okay, so people have obviously thought about the mind forever. Philosophers, theologians, artists.
Sure, it's a timeless human interest.
But psychology as a distinct science, that's much more recent. We really have to start in Germany with Wilhelm Wundt. He lived 1832 to 1920.
He's the guy, universally credited with setting up the first experimental psychology lab, Leipzig, 1879. That date is kind of the official starting pistol.
And that lab,
Yeah.
that specific act,
Yeah.
made all the difference, didn't it? It separated psychology from philosophy.
It did, because Wundt imported the methods, the rigor from the physical sciences. His main tool, which sounds fascinating now, was introspection.
Introspection, literally looking inward.
Exactly. He trained people, his observers, to focus very carefully on their own conscious mental experiences.
So what would that involve? Like, he'd show them something.
Yeah, maybe present a specific color or play a sound like a metronome beat. And the observer had to report in detail their sensations, their feelings, any images that came to mind.
Wow. Okay, and the goal?
The goal was to break down conscious experience into its most basic, simple, irreducible elements. Find the building blocks.
Okay, so this search for the basic building blocks, that led to the first major school of thought.
That's structuralism. Wundt, and especially his student Edward Titchener, championed this. They thought psychology could be like chemistry.
How so?
Well, just like chemistry breaks matter down into elements on the periodic table, they believed psychology could map the structure of the mind by analyzing mental experiences into their component parts. They wanted the mind's blueprint.
That makes sense as an ambition. But the method itself, introspection, seems problematic.
It absolutely was. It contained the seeds of its own downfall, really.
Because it's subjective, right? If I describe redness and you describe redness, how do we know we're talking about the same basic element?
Precisely. It lacked objectivity, replicability. How do you build a science on reports that vary from person to person, moment to moment? It just didn't have the scientific rigor needed.
So it couldn't last as the dominant approach.
No. And stepping into that sort of conceptual gap, especially in the U.S., was William James, a giant figure. James founded Functionalism.
And this was a different direction entirely.
Completely different. James wasn't really interested in the static structure of the mind. He cared about what the mind did, how it helped us survive.
Okay, so less about the what and more about the why or how.
Exactly. You used the car analogy earlier. It fits perfectly. Structuralists are taking the engine apart piece by piece.
Cataloging the nuts and bolts.
Right. Functionalists like James are asking, what's the car for? How does it help us get around?
So functionalism focused on the adaptive functions of behavior and consciousness.
How do things like memory, learning, or even just being conscious help us function, adapt to our environment, solve problems?
Yes. It immediately made psychology feel more practical, more focused on real-world applications, less abstract lab work, more about everyday life.
So you have this clash, structure versus function.
A big debate. But then things took an even more radical turn. Enter John Watson. lived 1878 to 1958.
And Watson looked at all this introspection, structure, function.
And basically threw it all out. He said, none of this is truly scientific. He founded behaviorism.
And his core idea was
Revolutionary, really confrontational at the time. He asserted that psychology must limit itself strictly to studying overt observable behavior, things you can actually see and measure objectively.
so anything happening inside the mind, thoughts, feelings, consciousness. Forget it. An inaccessible black box, he called it. If you can't observe it directly, it has no place in a scientific psychology.
Wow, that's dark.
It was. But you can see why it appealed. It promised objectivity, rigor, focus on the environment, stimuli, and observable responses.
And this line of thinking was picked up and really developed by B.F. Skinner later.
Massively reinforced by Skinner, he systematically explored how behavior is shaped entirely by its consequences, rewards, and punishments, what he called operant conditioning.
So behaviorism tried to explain everything we do without even needing to talk about the mind.
Pretty much, yeah. All nurture, very little nature, and definitely no unobservable mental states.
Okay, so that's one extreme, rejecting the mind. But there were other reactions against structuralism too, right?
Yes. Another important counter-movement was Gestalt psychology. People like Max Wertheimer were key here.
Gestalt. That means whole or form in German.
That's right. And their argument was that the structuralists were missing the forest for the trees. The brain doesn't just passively receive bits of sensory data and add them up.
What does it do then?
It actively organizes perception. It structures what we see into meaningful patterns or wholes right from the start.
Ah, like optical illusions. You don't see dots of color, you see a face, or maybe two faces depending on how you look.
Exactly. The perception is immediate. It's a whole pattern. The famous Gestalt phrase captures it. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Which is a direct hit against the structuralist idea of breaking everything down into basic elements.
Absolutely. It emphasized that our perceptual experience is more than just the individual sensations.
Okay, so we've got these academic debates raging, but happening somewhat in parallel, there's another figure developing ideas that would shake everything up.
You have to talk about Sigmund Freud, developing his psychodynamic perspective.
And Freud's focus was different again, while Wundt looked at the conscious mind.
Freud's radical contribution was his focus on the unconscious, this vast reservoir of thoughts, memories, desires, impulses that exist completely outside our awareness.
But still influence us.
Massively influence us, according to Freud. He believed our behavior is often the result of a hidden internal struggle.
A struggle between what?
Between our basic innate drives particularly, he emphasized sexual and aggressive impulses and the opposing forces within us, like our conscience, societal rules we've internalized, the ego trying to manage reality. These forces try to keep the unacceptable stuff buried deep in the unconscious.
That's a very different view of human nature, suggesting we're not entirely rational actors.
Profoundly different and highly controversial then and now. It suggests we're not always in control, that hidden dynamics are pulling the strings.
So looking back at this early period, it's amazing. Psychology didn't start with everyone agreeing. It started with fundamental disagreement.
Absolutely. Structuralism, functionalism, behaviorism, Gestalt, psychodynamic.
Right.
5 very different answers to what is psychology.
But maybe that conflict, that debate was necessary.
I think so. That intense argument ultimately forged the more integrated, multifaceted field we have today. It laid the groundwork.
Okay, so those historical schools battled it out, and eventually the field moved towards synthesis.
Yeah, people realized no single perspective held all the answers. Human behavior is just too complex for one lens.
So modern psychology operates with what? Like a set of tools or perspectives?
Exactly. We typically talk about 6 major contemporary perspectives. Think of them as specialized lenses psychologists use, depending on the question they're asking.
Let's walk through them. How did those historical ideas evolve? Let's start with behaviorism. Watson and Skinner's version seems limited now.
It was too narrow, yeah. That idea of the black box mind just couldn't hold. You have to account for thinking.
So the modern behavioral perspective isn't quite the same.
Right. It evolved, most notably, into social cognitive theory. This was crucial. It built a bridge back to the mind, to cognition.
And who was important there?
Albert Bandura is a key figure. His big idea was reciprocal determinism. It's not just the environment shaping us, like Skinner said.
It's more of a two-way street. Or three-way.
Exactly. It's a constant interaction between our environment, our behavior, and our cognitive factors, our thoughts, beliefs, expectations, values. They all influence each other.
So this allows for things Skinner ignored.
Definitely. Like observational learning or modeling, we learn a huge amount just by watching other people, seeing the consequences of their actions. Bandura's famous Bobo doll experiments showed this clearly.
And this updated behavioral view has practical uses.
Immense practical uses. It led directly to things like behavior therapy, systematically applying learning principles, both classical and operant conditioning, plus observational learning to change specific problem behaviors, like treating phobias or helping people break bad habits, often very effective.
Okay, that makes sense. What about Freud's legacy, the psychodynamic perspective? Still around?
Oh yes, still very much alive and influential, but it's also evolved quite a bit from Freud's original theories.
How so? Let's focus on the id and superego battling it out.
Somewhat, yeah. The modern view is largely shaped by the Neo-Freudians. They kept core ideas like the unconscious and the importance of early childhood experiences.
But they shifted the emphasis.
They did. Less emphasis on those basic biological drives, sex and aggression that Freud saw as primary. Instead, there's more focus on the ego, the development of the self, social relationships, and cultural factors.
So people like Erik Erikson, maybe? His stages of psychosocial development?
Exactly like Erikson. The Neo-Freudians look more at processes of self-awareness, self-direction, conscious choice. How do we build a coherent sense of self? How do we navigate our social world? It's less about primal urges and more about development and adaptation across the lifespan.
Got it. Now, the third pillar sounds quite different. The humanistic perspective.
It really was. It emerged mid-20th century as a self-proclaimed third force.
A third force against what?
Against the perceived negativity and determinism of the psychodynamic view and the sort of mechanistic, almost robotic view of humans and behaviorism.
So humanistic psychology wanted to bring something else back.
Absolutely. It put free will, conscious choice, and the potential for personal growth right at the center.
That sounds more optimistic.
Definitely. Key figures are Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. Maslow with his hierarchy of needs, aiming for self-actualization. Rogers with his client-centered therapy, emphasizing empathy and unconditional positive regard.
And their focus is squarely on conscious experience.
Yes. Even if those experiences are subjective, personal, and maybe hard to measure scientifically, they argued that understanding someone's unique perspective, their search for meaning and purpose, is essential. It validates the inner world.
Okay. Let's shift gears hard now. Pillar 4. The physiological perspective. This sounds much more like biology.
It is. This perspective focuses directly on the link between biological processes and behavior. It's about the hardware, essentially.
So studying things like hormones, brain chemistry, genetics.
Exactly. How do neurotransmitters affect mood? What's the genetic contribution to conditions like schizophrenia? How does brain damage impact language or memory? It often uses tools from neuroscience brain scans like fMRI or EEG.
And tied into this is evolutionary psychology.
Right, it's closely related. While physiological psychology looks at current biological mechanisms, evolutionary psychology asks the why question from a historical perspective.
Like, why do we have these mechanisms in the first place?
Precisely. How did natural selection shape not just our bodies, but our behaviors, our thought patterns, our emotions over millennia?
So it connects back to functionalism in a way, asking about adaptive purpose.
In a big way, yeah. But on a vast evolutionary timescale. Why might we have an innate fear of snakes, for example? Or why do certain social behaviors, like altruism towards kin, exist? It tries to trace the adaptive advantage of psychological traits.
Okay, that's 4. Pillar 5 feels central to modern academic psychology, the cognitive perspective.
It really is dominant in many research areas. After behaviorism's grip loosened, psychologists realized they had to study mental processes. Cognition came back in a big way.
And the cognitive perspective focuses specifically
on the mental processes involved in acquiring knowledge. How we perceive, learn, remember, think, solve problems, use language.
It sounds like it treats the mind like a computer, processing information.
That was an early and very influential metaphor, yes. Information processing. How do we encode information from the world, store it in memory, retrieve it when needed, and manipulate it to make decisions?
So it studies things like attention, memory systems, reasoning, decision-making.
All of that. It also looks at things like mental schemas or internal frameworks or scripts for understanding the world, how they help us process information efficiently, but also how they can lead to biases in our thinking.
Very important.
Yeah.
Okay, 1 pillar left, the sociocultural perspective.
This provides crucial context for all the others. It shifts the focus outwards, away from just the individual's mind or biology, towards the powerful role of social and cultural influences on behavior. It argues you can't fully understand a person without understanding their social world.
So, looking at things like societal norms, cultural values.
Yes, and factors like socioeconomic status, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. How does the culture you grow up in, say, an individualistic one versus a collectivist one, shape your sense of self, how you express emotion, how you interact with others?
It adds that whole layer of context.
Absolutely essential. The real strength of contemporary psychology is that researchers can, and often do, combine these perspectives.
So, to understand something complex like depression,
You might use a physiological lens, neurotransmitters, genetics, a cognitive lens, negative thought patterns, hopelessness, and a sociocultural lens, stressful life events, poverty, discrimination. No single perspective has the whole story. That integration is key.
right? So, when we talk about psychologists, most people probably picture a therapist, right? Someone you talk to on a couch.
That's the classic image, yeah. Clinical psychology is a huge part of the field, but it's so much broader than just that.
Okay, let's talk about the training first. What does it take to become a professional psychologist? It's usually advanced degrees, isn't it?
Almost always, yes. The most common path, especially for those interested in research, teaching at universities, or combining research with clinical practice, is the Doctor of Philosophy, the PhD.
That's the traditional scientist practitioner model.
Exactly. But because there's such a high demand for clinical services, another doctoral route became popular. The Doctor of Psychology, or CID.
And the CICD is different how?
It generally places more emphasis on practical clinical skills, assessment, and therapy techniques, and less on conducting original research compared to the PhD. It's geared more towards producing practitioners.
Okay. And you sometimes see an AD too.
Yes, a doctorate in education, AD, is common, particularly for psychologists working within school systems, perhaps in administrative or leadership roles related to psychological services for students.
But is a doctorate always required? What about master's degrees?
Good question. While you generally need a doctorate for independent practice and to use the title psychologist, a master's degree is often the standard entry requirement for certain specialized roles.
Like what, for example?
School psychology is a big one, working in schools, doing assessments, counseling, supporting students' learning and well-being. Also, industrial organizational psychology, or IO psychology.
IO psychology. That's applying psychology to the workplace.
Precisely. Studying things like employee motivation, job satisfaction, leadership styles, team dynamics, personnel selection, helping organizations function better. A master's is often sufficient to get started in IO.
The sheer number of subfields is kind of amazing when you list them out.
It really reflects those 6 perspectives we talked about. You have a comparative psychologist studying animal behavior, cognitive psychologist studying memory. But the growth areas are really interesting too, these emerging specialties.
Yeah, let's touch on a few. Neuropsychologists, what do they do exactly?
They're at that intersection of brain and behavior. They assess and treat people with brain injuries or neurological conditions.
So, after a stroke or with Alzheimer's disease.
Yes. Or traumatic brain injury, epilepsy, developmental disorders. They conduct detailed tests to understand how the condition is affecting cognitive functions, memory, attention, language, executive function, and help with diagnosis and rehabilitation planning. Often work in hospitals or rehab centers.
Okay. What about geropsychologists? Is that just psychology for older adults?
It's focused on the psychological aspects of aging, yes. But that's broader than just treating conditions like dementia, though that's part of it.
What else does it cover?
It covers adjustment to retirement, coping with loss, managing chronic illness, dealing with ageism, caregiver stress, assessing capacity, promoting mental well-being and cognitive health in later life. With aging populations, this field is becoming incredibly important.
Makes sense. Then there are psychologists working within other systems, like the legal system.
That's forensic psychology, applying psychological principles and knowledge within the legal and criminal justice context.
What kind of work does that involve? It sounds like TV shows.
Haha, maybe less dramatic, but it's varied. Conducting competency evaluations is someone fit to stand trial, assessing risk for future violence, providing expert testimony on things like eyewitness memory reliability or the effects of trauma, consulting on jury selection, evaluating child custody cases. It's a really complex interface.
And another visible one, sports psychologists.
Right. Helping athletes and performers reach their potential.
How? by teaching them mental skills.
Exactly. Things like managing performance anxiety, improving focus and concentration, setting effective goals, building confidence, enhancing motivation, coping with injuries, working on team cohesion. It's about applying psychology to optimize performance under pressure.
Okay, so the field is incredibly diverse in what psychologists do. Let's talk about who they are. The diversity of the professionals themselves. This seems crucial.
It's absolutely critical. If psychology aims to understand all human behavior, the people doing the research and providing the services need to reflect that diversity. Historically, that hasn't been the case.
Our sources indicate that people of color are still underrepresented.
Yes, significantly. Currently, about 1 in 7 working psychologists in the U.S. identify as belonging to a racial or ethnic minority group. That's a major gap compared to the general population.
And why is that gap a problem?
It matters because lived experience and cultural background can influence everything the research questions asked, how assessment tools are developed and validated, whether therapeutic approaches are culturally sensitive and effective for everyone. A lack of diversity can lead to blind spots and limit the applicability of the field's findings.
But there's positive news on this front.
Very positive news. The trend among early career psychologists, those who've recently earned their doctorates, is dramatically different. About 34%, over a third, are from racial or ethnic minority backgrounds.
So the pipeline is changing.
Exactly. This demographic shift is underway and suggests the field will become much more representative in the coming years, which should lead to more inclusive and culturally competent psychology.
And what about gender? Has there been a shift there too?
A massive shift. Psychology used to be a male-dominated field like most sciences. Now, women account for roughly 75% of new doctorate recipients in psychology.
Wow, 3/4. That's a complete reversal.
It is, and that also influences the field. Research priorities might shift, different therapeutic styles might become more prevalent, the overall culture changes.
So this increasing diversity, both racially, ethnically, and in terms of gender, is essential for the field's health and relevance.
Paramount. It improves the science by ensuring findings aren't just based on a narrow slice of humanity. It enhances external validity, the degree to which results can be generalized to different people in different situations. It's about making psychology truly for everyone.
Okay, this feels like the heart of it. If psychology is a science, it needs a method, the scientific method.
Non-negotiable. It's the framework that separates informed opinion or intuition from actual evidence-based knowledge.
So what are the basic steps? We probably learned this in school, but let's recap.
Sure. Generally, it involves 4 steps. 1, develop a research question. This might come from observing the world, from existing theories, from previous research.
Okay, you have a question then.
2, frame it as a specific, testable hypothesis. A hypothesis is basically an educated guess or prediction about the relationship between variables, stated in a way that allows it to be empirically tested, proven right or wrong.
Step 3 must be the testing part.
Exactly. 3, gather evidence systematically to test that hypothesis. This is where the different research methods come in.
And finally,
4, draw conclusions based on the evidence. Did the data support the hypothesis or refute it? This often leads back to refining the theory or asking new questions, so it's kind of cyclical.
the real complexity seems to be in step 3, gathering evidence. Psychologists have different tools for this, right? Depending on the question.
Absolutely. Different methods serve different purposes and have their own strengths and, crucially, weaknesses. Let's start with a very descriptive one, the case study method.
Case study. Like studying one person in great detail.
One person, or sometimes a small group. It's an in-depth investigation. You gather information through extensive interviews, maybe direct observation over time, reviewing personal records, diaries, historical documents.
What's the value of that? It sounds very specific.
It provides incredibly rich, detailed, qualitative information. You can get insights into complex phenomena that you'd miss with a broader survey. Think about early psychoanalysts developing theories based on detailed case studies of their patients.
Or you mentioned Jean Piaget earlier.
Perfect example. Piaget developed his influential theory of cognitive development largely by intensively observing and interviewing just a few children, including his own. He saw patterns in their thinking that large-scale methods might not have revealed.
But the downsides must be significant too.
Oh, definitely. Case studies lack rigorous controls. You can't easily determine cause and effect.
Right. And you're relying on potentially biased information.
Yes. Information often comes from people's memories, which we know can be faulty or selective. People might forget things, distort things, or consciously withhold information or try to present themselves in a certain light. So generalizability is a major issue.
Okay, so if you want breadth instead of depth, you use the survey method.
That's the typical approach. Gathering information from much larger groups of people using structured interviews or, more commonly, questionnaires. The goal is usually to describe attitudes, beliefs, or behaviors in a population.
And the key here is getting the right group of people to survey, the sample.
Absolutely critical. If you want your findings to apply to a larger population, say, all college students in the country, your sample has to be representative of that population.
How do you achieve that representativeness?
The gold standard is random sampling. This means every single person in the target population has an equal chance of being selected to participate in the survey. That minimizes systematic bias in who gets included.
But even with perfect random sampling, surveys aren't foolproof, are they? There are biases.
Big ones. A major concern is social desirability bias.
People answering in ways they think are socially acceptable.
Exactly. They might downplay undesirable behaviors like drug use or exaggerate desirable ones like voting or charitable giving because they want to look good or avoid judgment. They give the right answer, not necessarily the true one.
And what about who chooses to participate in the first place?
That's volunteer bias. People who volunteer for surveys or studies might be different from those who don't. Maybe they're more interested in the topic, have stronger opinions, are more educated, or just have more free time.
So the sample ends up not really representing the whole population, even if the initial selection was random.
Right. If volunteers are systematically different, your findings might not generalize accurately.
Okay, third method, naturalistic observation. This sounds like just watching people.
In a way, yes. It's the careful, systematic observation of behavior as it occurs in natural settings, a playground, a workplace, a shopping mall, watching animals in their habitat.
So the advantage is seeing real behavior, not lab behavior.
Exactly. High ecological validity. You're observing things as they naturally unfold without the artificiality of a lab potentially changing how people act.
But the challenge must be observing objectively.
That's the main drawback. Observer bias. Researchers might unintentionally see what they expect or want to see. Their own biases can influence how they interpret ambiguous behaviors or which behaviors they even notice and record.
How do researchers try to counteract that?
One common strategy is using multiple observers, often trained to use a specific coding system. Then you check for inter-rater reliability. Do the different observers agree on what they saw? High agreement suggests the observations are more objective.
Random checks, too.
Yeah, sometimes supervisors might do random spot checks to ensure observers are following the protocol correctly and consistently.
Okay, so case studies, surveys, naturalistic observation, these are mostly descriptive, right? They tell us what's happening.
Correct. They describe behavior and mental processes. They might reveal that two things tend to occur together, but they don't really explain why. For that, we need to look at relationships more formally.
And that brings us to the correlational method.
Yes. This method uses statistical techniques to examine the relationship between two or more variables. Are they associated? Do they tend to vary together?
And this relationship is measured with a specific statistic.
The correlation coefficient, usually symbolized as R. It's a number that ranges from max 1.000 to plus 1.000.
What do the positive and negative signs mean?
A positive correlation, closer to plus 1.00, means that as one variable increases, the other variable tends to increase too. Think study time and grades.
Okay, and negative.
A negative correlation, closer to max 1.00, means that as one variable increases, the other tends to decrease, maybe like hours spent watching TV and physical fitness levels.
And the closer the number is to one, positive and negative, the stronger the relationship.
Exactly. A correlation near zero means there's little to no relationship between the variables.
Correlation seems really useful.
It is. It can help predict behavior. If variables are strongly correlated, knowing the value of one helps you estimate the value of the other. It can identify groups at high risk for certain problems, like the correlation between smoking and lung cancer. It gives clues for further research.
Here comes the big warning sign, right?
The huge EE warning sign.
Yep.
Perhaps the most important thing to remember from this whole section, correlation does not imply causation.
Just because two things are related doesn't mean one caused the other?
Absolutely not. If variable A and variable B are correlated, it could be that A causes B, or it could be that B causes A, or, and this is very common, some third unmeasured variable C could be causing both A and B.
You used the ice cream and crime example before.
Classic example. Ice cream sales and crime rates are positively correlated. Does eating ice cream make people commit crimes? Of course not.
The third variable is
Hot weather. Summer heat increases both ice cream consumption and the likelihood that people are outdoors, interacting, getting into conflicts. Heat causes both. Always look for the third variable.
So if you really want to talk about cause and effect,
You have to move to the experimental method. This is the only method that allows researchers to directly explore cause and effect relationships.
what makes it different? What gives it that power?
Control. In an experiment, the researcher deliberately manipulates one variable, the independent variable, the presumed cause,
And then measures.
and then measures the effect of that manipulation on another variable, the dependent variable, the presumed effect or outcome. And crucially, this is done while trying to hold all other conditions constant or controlled.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's say you want to test if a new teaching method, independent variable, improves test scores, dependent variable. You'd implement the new method in one class and use the old method in another, then compare their scores.
How do you make sure the comparison is fair and the results are trustworthy?
Several key tools. First, operational definitions. You have to define your variables very precisely in terms of how they will be measured or manipulated.
So not just better teaching, but maybe using interactive simulations for 50% of class time.
Exactly. And not just test scores, but score on the standardized Chapter 5 history test. This allows others to replicate the experiment. Clarity is vital.
What else? You need comparison groups.
Yes. You need at least one control group. This group does not receive the experimental treatment, the manipulation of the independent variable. They might get the standard treatment or no treatment.
Why is the control group so important?
It provides a baseline. It helps ensure that any changes observed in the experimental group are actually due to the independent variable and not just due to passing time or the participants knowing they're in a study or some other factor.
Okay. And how do you decide who goes into which group? Experimental or control?
This is perhaps the most critical element for establishing causality. Random assignment.
That sounds like random sampling, but it's different.
Very different. Random sampling is about how you select participants from the population to be in the study. Random assignment is about how you place those participants into the different groups, experimental versus control, within the study.
And why is random assignment so crucial?
Because if every participant has an equal chance of being assigned to either group, it theoretically balances out any pre-existing differences between the groups. Differences in intelligence, motivation, age, personality, whatever. It makes the groups equivalent at the start, on average.
So if the groups differ on the dependent variable at the end, you can be much more confident it was the independent variable that caused the difference.
Precisely. It isolates the impact of the variable you manipulated.
But experiments aren't always possible, are they?
Sometimes it's unethical or impractical to manipulate the independent variable. You can't randomly assign people to smoke or not smoke for 20 years to study cancer. You can't randomly assign children to abusive versus non-abusive homes.
So in those cases, you have to rely on correlational or other methods, even though they don't prove cause.
Correct. You lose that ability to make strong causal claims when random assignment isn't possible. The conclusions become more tentative.
One more thing about experiments. Controlling for expectations. People knowing they're getting a treatment might affect them.
Huge factor. This is the placebo effect. Just the belief that you're receiving an effective treatment can actually lead to improvements in symptoms or performance.
So how do you control for that?
In drug trials, for example, the control group often receives a placebo, an inert substance like a sugar pill that looks identical to the real drug.
So they think they're getting the treatment.
Yes. This allows researchers to separate the actual physiological effect of the drug from the psychological effect of simply receiving treatment.
And sometimes neither the participants nor the researchers know who got what.
That's a double-blind study. It controls for both participant expectations, placebo effect, and researcher expectations, observer bias. If the researcher assessing the outcome doesn't know which group the participant was in, they can't unintentionally bias the results.
Wow, okay. Lots of controls needed. Finally, overarching all of this research, there must be ethical rules.
Absolutely. Especially when dealing with human participants, ethical considerations are paramount. Research proposals have to be reviewed and approved by ethics review committees or institutional review boards, IRBs.
What are the core principles they look for?
2 are non-negotiable. First, informed consent. Participants must be told enough about the study, its purpose, procedures, potential risks, and benefits to make an informed decision about whether to participate. And they must know they can withdraw at any time without penalty.
Wait a second.
Confidentiality. Information obtained about individual participants must be kept private and confidential. Data is often anonymized to protect identities. This applies to clinical records too, of course.
Does this extend to animal research too? Psychology sometimes uses animals.
Yes, there are strict ethical guidelines for animal research as well. It must have a clear scientific purpose, often studying things that can't ethically be investigated in humans. Animals must be treated humanely, housed properly, and discomfort minimized. It's a carefully regulated area. Hashtag tag outro.
Okay, that was quite a journey. We went from Wundt looking inward in his lab.
Through those big theoretical battles, behaviorism, Gestalt, Freud,
To land in modern psychology with its 6 core perspectives: behavioral, psychodynamic, humanistic, physiological, cognitive, sociocultural, a much more integrated view.
and crucially underpinned by a diverse scientific toolkit. Case studies, surveys, observation, correlation, and the powerhouse experiment.
Understanding not just the methods but their limits feels like the most important thing. Correlation isn't causation.
Knowing what kind of question each method can actually answer, that's vital.
Which leads us perfectly into our final thought for you, the listener. We've talked about the science, the methods, the potential biases.
Social desirability, observer bias, the placebo effect.
Given all that complexity and the sheer amount of psychological information you encounter every day, news headlines, self-help books, internet claims,
Oh yeah, it's everywhere.
the single most essential skill you need is critical thinking.
Absolutely. At its heart, critical thinking means adopting a questioning attitude. Don't just accept claims at face value.
It's about weighing evidence, analyzing arguments.
Yes, and being willing to challenge assumptions, both others' assumptions and your own conventional wisdom. Ask tough questions. What's the source of this claim? Is the evidence anecdotal, correlational, or experimental?
Are they confusing correlation with causation? What biases might be operating here in the study or in how it's being reported?
Think back to all those pitfalls we discussed. How easily survey results can be skewed. How observers might see what they expect. How tempting it is to jump from A is related to B to A causes B.
So here's the final question we want to leave you with. Given how complex human behavior is, and how many potential biases can creep into studying it, how absolutely essential is it for you to constantly apply critical thinking when you hear claims about psychology, especially outside of rigorous, peer-reviewed science?
How crucial is it to demand evidence, question assumptions, and look for alternative explanations before you accept something as fact? That's really the homework from this deep dive. Be a critical consumer of psychological information.
A really vital skill in today's world. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the foundations of psychology.
It was great digging into it.
We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.